The Athletic.
Some of us thought it was all over and that Pecco Bagnaia was going to romp to the title for the rest of the 2024 MotoGP season, but the British Grand Prix sprung a bit of a curveball. Jorge Martin is not out of this fight. Is Enea Bastianini back in it? This is the Race MotoGP podcast, or as it's also known, Val was right about everything. Because last week when we predicted what might happen in the rest of the season, there was quite a split between a kind of, after what Martin did at the Sachsenring before the second summer break, this is all over. On some, in some quarters we felt that. In other quarters there was still hope for a title fight that would go all the way. There was still a bit of faith in Martin. Some of us bottled it slightly on the podcast, then in a later website column went full on, Martin's going to win the championship. Hands up, I'm guilty there, but I'm going to stick with that even more now because Jorge Martin pulled some points back from Pecco Bagnaia in the British Grand Prix. Bagnaia crashed out the sprint. Bastianini won both races. This might be wide open after all. So I'm Matt Beard. Joining me for a bumper episode of the Race MotoGP podcast are Simon Patterson, the person who predicted Pecco was going to walk it, Val Khorounzhiy, who was more hopeful about Martin than most, Megan White. We don't know what your prediction was pre-Silverstone, so you can kind of amend history with hindsight if you want. But before we go to what we think, let's chuck in what the Race Members Club have been saying about this title battle twist. Advocate for Factory Riders says, do the results of Silverstone do anything to change the view of a particular host that the season is over and Pecco has it won? Yeah, that one's for Simon. John Ip says, can Bastianini realistically contend for the title? And then both Gordon and Martin Flatman reference what we've been talking about for a long time in terms of who Ducati might favour. Gordon says, everyone is scared of Martin taking the number one plate to Aprilia, but it would be utterly hilarious if Bastianini took it to Tech 3 KTM. And Martin said, Ducati spent all their time making sure Martin doesn't take the number one plate, only for Enea Bastianini to take it to KTM instead. So, where shall we start with this? I'm going to let Megan, as this week's wildcard guest, come in first. Before Silverstone, were you in Camp Simon or Camp Val in terms of Pecco's going to walk it versus this isn't over yet?
I would say Camp Simon. I would say I'm still mostly in Camp Simon. I still think Pecco's going to win the championship. I still don't think Martin will do it. But Enea Bastianini obviously has thrown a bit of a curveball. I don't think it's a totally unexpected curveball because Enea Bastianini is a factory Ducati rider for a reason. He is no scrub. So, he's definitely changed things up a bit. I think that weekend kind of showed the best of Bastianini. And if he can keep putting in performances like that, there's absolutely nothing to say. As one of our valued members suggested, it would be hilarious if he took the number one plate to Tech 3. It's like when you've got a situation where someone's caused a distraction. Martin is the distraction that was caused. Everyone's like, oh, look over here. And Bastianini's just come around the back and gone, hello, while nobody was looking. So I think that the theme going forward will be how do you solve a problem like Enea? Because why is he going to listen to factory orders? He's leaving. Why isn't it? I mean, Martin won't listen to factory orders either because him and Pramac are leaving. But the Bastianini kind of intra-team battle may well prove to be another thorn in Ducati's side going forward for the rest of the season.
Well, this is kind of what I thought would happen a year and a half ago when Ducati signed Bastianini off the back of those performances with Gresini, where he had irritated the factory team and Pecco Bagnaia quite a bit. I was thinking, great, we just bring that into the factory garage. Bastianini's mega. We're going to have lots of tension in the garage. And of course, mainly for injury reasons, but also he wasn't that settled with the bike last year. It didn't really happen. Start of this year, Bastianini's looking more his old self again. And at Silverstone, he's really looking like his old self. So, Val, I'll let you come in first on this bit. Is this Bastianini back to his absolute best? Is this sustainable? Is this the sort of thing we're going to see from him from now on? And does that make him a legitimate title contender? Bearing in mind, he is 49 points behind still.
Yeah, I think 49 points is really quite a lot. It doesn't feel like a lot because there's 37 per weekend, but in the range of probabilities, it is a big gap to close. Not impossible, but usually when you see gaps like that closed, I mean, somebody got hurt. Somebody broke a collarbone or something, and that's where they lose the points. That's why Bagnaia's title last year wasn't any danger to begin with. I do think Bastianini's back to his best. I do also think that, Silverstone clearly, as it was this weekend, was particularly conducive to Enea Bastianini's particular set of skills. I've banged the drum this whole time that this is a bad format for him, the sprint format, that, shifting all the qualifying action earlier into the weekend means he's less prepared. The sprint just doesn't play to his strength. The fact remains that, of course, the main race pays twice as many points, and that's where he's at his best still. But, once we saw him win the sprint on Saturday, I would have been very, very surprised if he then let the main race slip away on Sunday. And honestly, it was almost, in light of that sprint context, it was almost harder than you would have expected in a way, but it was completely conditioned by the opening laps. The opening laps on Sunday still showed where Bastianini's weaknesses, and I don't think that's fixable, because that's just part of the package. He is going to be tentative on the early laps, and then he's going to find the extra gear. If you look at the lap times at the end of the race, it makes it very, very, very clear how tire conditioned this was. Bastianini was the only guy in the 159 range at the end. He's doing his usual devil magic, basically, with the tire life. There were like 5 other guys in the 2-minute range, maybe 4 or 5, and everybody else was a second or more slower.
Wow.
So the levels of tire drop over. In fact, I think one of the quickest guys on the final lap, if you exclude Bastianini, was Johan Zarco on the LCR Honda, which should tell you about how much this was no longer about ultimate pace, but just about what you had left. And clearly, this is the race that exists for Enea Bastianini to win it. He cannot count on all of the other tracks, or most of the other tracks, over the rest of the weekend, over the rest of the year, serving that up. But there's some good tracks coming up. I think he's decent in Austria. I think he's very good at Misano. I think Sepang coming up, he's mega there. There's a chance. And the other reason there's a chance actually takes us back to the sprint for me. He doesn't crash as much as the other guys.
True.
Which is maybe part of the reason there. I think he's just a bit slower, but the way he is a bit slower stresses the front less, basically, I guess. Because, both Bagnaia and Martin going gung-ho at one another, having the rear push the front. We saw Bagnaia crash out in a desperation chase on Saturday. We saw him very nearly do the same on Sunday, at Luffield when Bastianini was overtaking him. Bagnaia wasn't quite down, but it was pretty late into the corner, and already he was picking himself up. So that could have easily been another 16 points gone. Bastianini has been more robust in bringing the bike to the checkered flag, which is important in a game like this. And I think with those two guys very preoccupied with each other, that can play into his hands. But I'll go back to what I said earlier. 49 points it's a lot of points.
Yeah, I think Silverstone was so unusual that it's almost worth looking at it as, it's almost like a wet race to me. Like, this was a really odd set of circumstances where it didn't play out the way that a normal Silverstone does. It didn't play out the way that a normal race weekend was, with people who never struggle from tire problems suddenly developing them, random people being fast, and as much as you'd expect Jack Miller or a Brad Binder or a Miguel Oliveira to be really quick in wet conditions, Val hit the nail on the head. These are conditions made for Enea Bastianini's particular brand of tire management witchcraft, and I don't want to get, especially given the gap in the points, I don't want to get too excited about whether or not this means that he's suddenly a title contender. I think there's still a lot of work to do. There's still going to be more weekends where he has to prove himself. And I think quite a significant number of the rounds coming up are places where he is strong, but others and the guys he's fighting with are strong as well, and I don't know if he'll be in a position to significantly cut down that gap. I mean, it's doable, but the reality is he needs both Martin and Bagnaia to have disasters at various points in the upcoming rounds, probably multiple times each, to be in contention again. And as much as both of them love the occasional no pressure, let's throw it down the road and chop our championship lead for a bit of drama move, I can't see both of them doing it repeatedly to the extent that it brings Bastianini back into the title fight over giving one or the other of them an advantage in the title fight.
Yeah, but for me, best case scenario is he's off 30 points coming into Valencia. And then obviously when you're in a title decider, absolutely anything can happen. Even though I don't think Enea Bastianini historically is very good at Valencia, actually. That's not really his kind of track. It's still as funny as it is to imagine a number one on the Tech 3 next year. It is a huge long shot, but the fact is, this is a very particular rider who, the good thing for him is he can beat Bagnaia and Martin reliably in a very specific set of circumstances. So if you just give him that race over and over and over again, he'll beat him over and over and over again. You know, at lap 10, you know, what was it? Was Bastianini already running second by that point? I imagine he was.
Yeah, I think so.
And, you know, with Martin up ahead, did anybody actually think Martin was winning that race and not Bastianini? No, everybody knew where this was heading. Everybody knew that, you know, sooner or later, Enea Bastianini will come through, because that's what he does when he's in a good position coming into the second half of the race. It's valuable, but he just, for this to be a title run, he has to maximize every opportunity that is. And on weekends where Bagnaia and Martin have an extra step, and there's been plenty of those, Bastianini needs to be the other GP24, basically. He needs to be third every time. You know, it's difficult. In sprints particularly, it's not going to be easy. But, I don't know. There's a lot of the championship still left. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of championships still left, and he had enough races that presented these circumstances for him to pull off this party trick again and again and again in his final year with Gresini before he joined the factory team. So you've kind of convinced me a little bit in the course of this conversation. Certainly at the end of the race yesterday, I was thinking that was great, and I love the Bastianini storyline, but this points gap is still too big. But he's put himself in anything can happen territory rather than absolutely no way territory, and that's quite a significant step.
I love that by trying to convince you that he wasn't going to be a championship contender, we've accidentally convinced you that he might be, because I think that's pretty much what's happened there.
Yeah.
Val,
yes, absolutely.
Val said that if he goes into Valencia with 30 points of a gap, then it's anything can happen territory. But I think given his record at Valencia, that's unrealistic. If he goes into Sepang with 30 points of a gap, then that's anything can happen territory, because that's a place where we know that he can realistically pull together that sort of an advantage.
True.
And it's Sepang that tends to be a bit more, you know, you can get a fluke weather condition or a track that's suddenly like 400 degrees hotter than the surface of the sun, and weird things happen at Sepang that I think favour Bastianini more than the weird things that happen at Valencia will favour him.
Well, apart from the rain, I don't think he wants rain in Sepang. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want rain in Sepang.
Yeah, but I don't think any of them want rain in Sepang.
Yeah,
you know, and
true.
it goes back to the Martin and Bagnaia stupid mistakes quartet that needs to happen. That is much higher. There's a much more higher chance of that happening in wet conditions at any one of the remaining circuits.
I think just going back to what you're saying about points differences, though, obviously the format was different in 2022, but after Silverstone in 2022, there was 49 points between Bagnaia and Quartararo. So 37 points, it's that thing you were saying of like 37 points is a lot, but 37 points isn't a lot when there's, you know, so many on offer every weekend. So I don't know. I think Enea might be an outside bet there. Not that I'm a betting person, but if I was.
Megan, let me counter you there by saying that if we put Bagnaia and Martin on Yamaha M1s, then Enea Bastianini will win this title for sure. 100%.
Yeah, Val, your Yamaha corner is later in this episode.
Yeah. It was more as a demonstration of like big gaps are not insurmountable, kind of
course,
you know.
Well, they're not insurmountable particularly, not necessarily if your points leader is on a rubbish bike, but they're not insurmountable if your points leader is chucking their bike down the road. And there was some, you know, irony expressed in the work chat on Saturday when Bagnaia, the one we talked about, Simon particularly, being captain consistency, who's just going to cruise it home from here, was the one throwing it down the road. So Simon, you can go first on this. What happened with Bagnaia this weekend? Why was he not following the script? And yeah, we're picking on you, but I do not think you are unique in the MotoGP punditry or fan world in thinking that Bagnaia, as already a double world champion who can see these things over the line, would take control of it from here when Martin had just blown a massive points lead. So, you know, we're picking on you, but you had a fair point. But why did Bagnaia have the weekend he had?
So I should say, first of all, in Bagnaia's defence, he held his hands up after the crash on Saturday in the sprint race and said, I made a mistake, I was wrong. That was on me, which is fair. But I think he's maybe being a little bit harsh on himself, because I think that his race was compromised as soon as it started by goddamn ride-height devices. Like, I'm not going to swear, I'm going to be polite. I hate them. And they are like the cause of 50% of ODNFs right now. His start device stuck, his rear start device stuck off the line, didn't disengage, cost him a really good start. You look at the rest of this season and you see Pecco Bagnaia on the front row of the race or the grid, and you think, okay, he's going to be first or second coming out of the second corner.
Yeah.
Because he's good at starts. That works. And he wasn't. He was P4, a bit buried in the pack, getting battered around a bit. And it meant that he couldn't do his thing, which is, controlling from the front, being incredibly hard to pass until everyone else kind of loses interest and then he clears off into the distance. I think he could have won that sprint race if his right-hand device hadn't stuck. That cost him, and then he was pushing too hard to try and get past. The crash was triggered by being in a position that he shouldn't have been in, realistically. I wonder if maybe he didn't say this out loud, but I'm just like as a speculation, I wonder if maybe his tire pressures were set to expect a race where he was leading and he knew he had to get past very quickly, and that's something that contributed to, forcing an error. And then I think from that, it kind of momentum lost for Sunday. Tires were a bit different and it was a tricky race. In any other world, if he'd won the sprint race or been second in the sprint race to Martin, he'd have been really happy with third on Sunday, given the conditions. And the only reason he wasn't is because of, the points that he threw away. But I think everything started from the moment that ride-height device refused to release for him.
Yeah, I agree, because coming out of Abbey, I think he was P1, and then, going through farm, just the bike is low. So it doesn't take the corner, and you watch him get swamped at that point coming through it was really confusing to watch, because normally, having seen so many MotoGP races this year, when you see Bagnaia go through into the lead off the line, you're like, well, that's, the next few corners, just focus on something else in your brain. Focus on what's going on behind him. And then suddenly, the plan changes and you're like, oh, there's a lead fight. Why? Didn't he have it? He has it, doesn't he? And, that completely conditioned the race. Then on Sunday, he wasn't able to, basically, he wanted to really lean on the front. I think that's how he wanted to go about winning that race. And in doing so, he would have preserved the rear. He would have kept his, he kept his pace going. But it was a cold track. It was a cold day. So, he was couldn't use the hard front. Only 2 riders used the hard front, I believe, and one of them crashed immediately and took his teammate down. So probably good idea not to bother. But, he didn't run the tire that he wanted to run. He couldn't lean on the front the way he wanted to lean on it, and he chewed up the rear very quickly. I don't think it's representative of what he can do in races. At the same time, I think Jorge Martin had a really good weekend at a track that mentally I did have penciled in the Bagnaia corner. And for me, it's just, going back to that wider earlier thing, I think there is enough variance here and enough of a sort of track dispersion coming up. This is why I still do believe that Martin can hang in there, because I think nothing that Ducati can do in terms of favoritism. So I don't think Ducati will ever go to open team orders. And beyond that, I think nothing that it does or can do behind the scenes changes the ultimate fact that these guys are close enough to where moment-to-moment stuff decides it. And this weekend, they were close, and the big breaks largely went Martin's way. But the fact that Martin was able to hang this close with Bagnaia at Silverstone, where honestly I did expect Bagnaia to be stronger than this, I think bodes well for the rest of his championship challenge.
Well, I'm going to come heavily in from Martin corner here. I express a fondness for Martin in this podcast quite often, and the main reason is I think he makes a storyline better, and I like storylines because they drive website traffic and podcast listenership. But also there's a bit of me that knows that if I was a teenage fan right now, Martin would be the one I'd be cheering for. Like earlier in life, I was a huge Marco Simoncelli fan. In F1, I was a Juan Pablo Montoya fan. I like the Larry people. So I love the idea of Martin sustaining a title challenge. But what really impressed me this weekend is so many of our predictions about Martin post-Saxon Ring era were about his head going, about him just not reverting to his worst stereotype of just chuck it down the road, just carry a chip on your shoulder and just don't channel that aggression to speed, channel it into mistakes instead. But he was not the fastest at Silverstone. He was nearly the fastest, but he got the second places. He got the points. He's back in the championship lead. He was sensible Martin, and we weren't sure if sensible Martin was done for the season now that he hadn't got the Works Ducati ride for next year. To me, this was like, oh yeah, Jorge, you've shown you can do this. This is fully game on now because you made a bad weekend work for you.
He was lucky in that he messed up Village in that one moment that led Enea Bastianini through. I think he was... I know that sounds ridiculous because that cost him the win, but I think the risk of tossing all the points out of the window if he did keep up that battle, because you're not going to just accept Bastianini coming through, right? You need those 5 points. You have to fight for it. But when you've made that error against a rider who chances are is just going through anyway, the pace on the final lap showed that there's no answer there. It almost was the best possible outcome for Martin, where he watches Bastianini whiz past once he gets Village wrong, and he's just like, all right, that's fine, second's fine. And he can bring it home, and that's okay.
Yeah, I do agree. I know I'm Team Pecco, but I do agree that what Martin did was very sensible. The way he handled that was very mature. And, he made that little mistake at turn 1, and then he made that mistake at turn 3, and Bastianini went through. And maybe the Martin of old would have been like, oh, I'm going to get after him, and then crashed. But actually, maybe he just kind of looked at that, assessed the situation, and went, that guy's gone. I'll let him do his thing, and I'll do mine. So actually, in the grand scheme of things, I think that was really important. So maybe we can see more of that in future from him, and maybe that will keep this battle closer. But we'll see.
That's also part of the Bastianini argument, isn't it? Because I'm sure there is now an aura around him of this is not a guy you want to have behind you in the final 5 laps of the race, and if he's ahead of you, forget about it. And I think that is part of the sort of the calculations that riders will be making in their heads. I'm sure if it was Pecco ahead of him, Martin would have been like, maybe I can still do this. Maybe I can hang with him. If it's Bastianini, you're just like, go, whatever. Go, you freak alien nonsense man.
Tire wizard.
Do whatever lap times you do. Yeah.
Speaking of wizards, I appreciated Bastianini quoting Harry Potter spells while celebrating when surrounded by the actors who played the Weasley twins. I was like, I did not expect to hear Bastianini saying Wingardium Leviosa at the end of that race. That's a tangent. But I think for me, the other thing with Martin's performance is that those weekends are how someone is going to win this championship, because you've got 3 riders who on their best days are capable of being unbeatably brilliant. 2 of them on their worst days will chuck it down the road. And by that I mean Martin and Bagnaia. The other one on his worst days will probably be 6th, 7th. You might not notice he's there. And he's too far behind to rely on that. He needs the big wins. It's these kind of accept 2nd, accept 3rd days that are going to actually be the foundation of a title, a victorious title bid, I think. We've already thrown in a couple of questions from the Race Members Club in this episode, so let's do a little bit of a shout for the Members Club. You can join us via Patreon, search for The Race there, or via the website, go to the-race.com/members-club. You can be part of a little scheme that for not very much money at all per month or per year gets you loads of exclusive content. If you join via Patreon, you can just join the Riders tier to just get the bike stuff if you don't want our car racing extras as well. Basically means you get a chance to ask questions that get featured in podcasts. You get exclusive bonus podcasts as well, and a few other ways to kind of influence what we do and chip in. And we every idea someone expresses on there gets banked in a little file, and we come back to it to make sure we do deliver that content for you, whether in audio, written, or even video form eventually. So it's our way of letting you be part of what we do effectively, and we absolutely love the response we're getting in the bike section since we launched that in June. We really appreciate your support and engagement in there. It makes us smile a lot. So this week's MotoGP Extra is going to be a behind the scenes special from Silverstone, and for that we sent the Race Media's creative lead, our design genius Oliver Card, to Silverstone. Now Ollie went as a fan last year, but this was his paddock debut, so we basically left him in Simon's hands for the weekend. weekend. Simon, what were you particularly keen to give Ollie a taste of when bringing him into the paddock and media world for the first time?
So I knew that Ollie had been as a fan before because we saw him last year as a fan. But the plan for this weekend was to give him a bit more of the paddock experience, to get him inside the bubble of what I actually do when I'm in the paddock, which is like 50%, probably about 20% sitting watching screens, 40% listening to riders talk whenever they do the crazy media debriefs, and then the rest of my time spent wandering up and down the paddock, finding people and talking to them and bumping into random people to see what tidbits of information I can steal off them. And I think you get a fairly broad coverage of that. There wasn't too much of the actual watching motorbikes part, which is the not the least interesting part of my job, but it's like the least engaging part of my job, maybe, apart from on a Sunday. Free practice one doesn't have the same draw as walking down the paddock and bumping into a couple of world champions and having a bit of gossip with them or something like that. So I think you get a fair... I'm not being unfair in saying I hope Ollie got a full spread of what I do at Silverstone.
Yeah, Ollie, what surprised you about Simon's life?
Well, I mean, it was a pretty incredible experience, and I think Simon summed it up really well. I mean, I got the full-blooded paddock run-through with everything. So before I caught up with Simon, I actually joined a lot of the Day of Champions celebrations, which is a big kickoff for the weekend. It's a big charity fundraising day, which happens on the Thursday. And this was something which was pretty special, I think, for all the fans who turned up. That was a really great way to sort of kick off the weekend and sort of set the tone of the celebration, and that's kind of festival feel of what they're trying to do at Silverstone. So that was something pretty special. But so did the ride-in for that, which was great. So me and another 200 bikers all kind of riding to the circuit and getting to actually ride onto the Silverstone circuit and do a couple of laps. We were told in the briefing that this was just going to be a processional thing, just to kind of get to experience it. And it was processional right up until the moment we got onto the track. And then 3 KTMs just absolutely head past me because they maybe didn't get the memo compared to some other people.
Did you dive bomb them back?
Well, I would love to say that I did. The bike that I've got is sort of like a little baby tourer. So it's more for pootling rather than, it's hardly a track weapon. And also I had all my luggage on still because I'd ridden up from London first thing in the morning. So this was sort of, 5:30 start riding up, and I've still got about 60 kilos of luggage and stuff and all my panniers and everything. So I definitely wasn't there to set new lap records. But it was, from a fan experience, it was something really special. And I think obviously it's quite a lot to ask fans to maybe take off an extra day's annual leave to come up on the Thursday, but I think you get rewarded with something pretty special. There's loads of other stuff going on as well. So that was a great experience. And then once I got actually into the paddock and into that sort of environment, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't somewhat overwhelming. I think for a first timer, it's such a hive of activity and so many different things going on that I felt like I definitely needed a bit of Simon's guidance. So Simon basically had a 6'4" toddler to deal with for the weekend as he sort of guided me through and kind of pointed me in the right direction and explained everything. Because as we said, I've been to Silverstone as a fan, and anyone who's been to Silverstone knows this is a big site. But actually, I realised I've only ever seen Silverstone from the outside, but to see it from the inside, it's still this huge environment, and the way it's kind of split across the site as well. So you've got such a wide area to cover, and everyone's there with a purpose and a mission to what they're trying to do, and so when you turn up, it's a huge kind of array of people all heading in different directions, equipment going in all sorts of places. But actually, Simon was a fantastic host. Really, I really appreciate the glimpse that he gave me and getting to be in those environments and seeing what he does. And I think that's the thing that was so fascinating to me is just on the ground what you need to do to be there. And fundamentally, the most important thing is to be present. And actually in those, I joined Simon for his paddock walks, and he sort of grabbed me and said, right, come on, we're going for a walk. And in a sort of way which is like, am I about to be told off for something I've just done? And then you go, oh no, wait, this is actually an important part of it. This is what we need to do. So it was fascinating. And then just to find yourself in those moments suddenly you're in the media scrum. And again, understanding on the outside what it's like. But then when you're in the room and you realize there is this sort of ballet of chaos which happens, of riders coming in, making sure everyone has their time, flipping through different languages, all of that kind of process as well. So it took it took a few days to sort of really click into gear to how things work. But by the end of the weekend, you sort of got this real sense of this is a kind of mad traveling circus, but there is this wonderful flow of information and data and gossip and all of these different layers going on. And also there's a motorcycle racing.
You said you were a 6'4" toddler for Simon to look after for the weekend. I did find my 2-year-old in our bed with a power drill the other night. So as long as you didn't do anything like that in any of the garages, then fine. Anyway, that's just a toddler tangent. Back to MotoGP. The fact we had you in the paddock for Thursday as well was really handy with your design eye, because this was the weekend where every MotoGP team ran a retro livery. I almost want to put like air quotes around retro there based on what we ended up seeing. So this was go on.
I was going to say it was retro inspired. So that was
that was it.
That was a caveat that I think a lot of the teams had in terms of retro inspired, was very particular, and some were definitely inspired rather than retro.
Yeah. So this was, every team had to run a retro inspired livery for the 75th anniversary of the championship. Lovely idea. We were all so excited about this. Simon, you should come in on this as well, but we'll let Ollie go first. Who do you think nailed the brief? I mean, there'll be more of this in your standalone bonus behind-the-scenes episode, so give us a highlights reel now. Who nailed the brief? Who really didn't?
Oh, there was quite a range, I would say. The people who nailed it, it's interesting actually in the reveal and kind of seeing the initial impression versus what you see on track. So the initial impression, the people that I thought did a fantastic job, Honda did such a wonderful job with their Freddie Spencer bike. It just looked wonderful. I think you could race it now and it would still look good. It was just the right level of updating and just those kind of details. Lovely things. This is such a minor detail. The clarity of the rider numbers was such a great detail to have on there, and it just had that look and feel and felt wonderful. I mean, Honda having fewer sponsors than maybe some of the other teams, it helped a little bit because they could just run a much cleaner livery, but they could still reference their Repsol history, things like that. It was just such a great bit of work. When I actually got out to trackside on the Sunday morning and watched the bikes roll out in anger for the warm up, one thing I thought was interesting is that a couple of the bikes really actually caught my eye, and the Yamaha, when I first saw it, I thought, yep, that's great, they've done the brief. But actually, it was the one on track that I just couldn't take my eyes off. It just looks so good. And actually, the whole picture of, the team wearing the kit and things like that, they just did a brilliant job there. I think my sort of the top three, I would say the other one on the top three was just the Aprilia, because it just looked mean and lovely. They did their Black Pearl concept, referencing the sort of Max Biaggi era, and it just looked great. And theirs was great because it wasn't an exact copy. They'd sort of taken elements, so it had the feel and the kind of the energy of that Biaggi design. So I really applaud Aprilia for being creative with it, not just kind of going old school.
Simon, who stood out for you and who less so?
Ducati stood out for me because they phoned it in and it was weak and it was disappointing. And they did it for, I don't know why they did it. I've heard whispers and rumors from a few people well connected that they've been complaining about the cost of doing it, and it's kind of demanded money from series organizers Dorna to make up, to cover their costs for it, which would be a valid defense if this wasn't the same company that has used their own special livery complete with brand new team uniforms at least twice in the past 12 months. Because they used the all yellow at Misano last year. They used the Italian blue at Mugello a couple of months ago. But it just feels like they just didn't bother. They clearly just didn't want to take part in it for whatever reason. And they stood out in how weak the effort was, I think. It was, I don't know whether it's beholden to sponsors or what it is more than anyone else, but even for most of Thursday, Pecco Bagnaia spent most of Thursday complaining about how weak the Ducati effort was whenever the bikes are first unveiled, and telling everyone how great the Honda and the Yamaha looked, which is an unusual approach to take, and I'm sure probably got him a rap in the knuckles from the press officer, but I was really, really disappointed in their lack of commitment.
I loved Pecco's honesty really about it, because everyone was saying it. That was kind of the feel, is that they just didn't. it was just a missed opportunity as well, because especially with Ducati's heritage as well, I mean, there's so much they could have done. I mean, they could have gone all the way back and done a beautiful kind of polished silver, really referencing the early days as well. There's so much they could have drawn from, but this sort of felt like it just wasn't, it wasn't retro enough, but then it sort of, you mistake it for a sort of current livery almost. It just didn't have that look and feel. I appreciate there's limitations on these things, because fundamentally what they're referencing with their 2003 is a cigarette branded bike. So they can't use the same look as that. But there's things that you can do to kind of flip that as well. And I think it's important for teams like Ducati to work with their sponsors and convince them that it's worth making those changes. It's worth being flexible maybe on some of these brand guidelines that come through. There's a lot that you could do to fix it. Maybe do something else for a start. But one of the key things that you could do to fix it is just flipping the Lenovo logo from the white on black, big black box, to being black on white. That would help. That would just be a little move that they could do. And I think it's important to get that balance. I appreciate the obligation of, these are commercial deals which fund the running of the bike, so they have to be sensitive to that. But I think brands would be successful if they were actively involved in that process and felt a part of it, and if the teams could convince them it's worth doing this because everyone's going to love us, you get so much more attention. I mean, the one saving grace that Ducati have was Bastianini's tribute helmet, which did sort of slightly balance the things as well. So his Hellwood tribute, which was beautiful, and was lovely, and that was the redemption right on top. Whereas everything else was just a shame, really. I mean,
this wouldn't have saved the Ducati so much, because ultimately Ducati just looked like a modern Ducati, and you couldn't really, and whatever sponsor obligations they had, they clearly either couldn't or didn't particularly care to work around. And I also can't understand that to a point, I guess, because those deals have been signed long in advance, and sometimes firms will be rigid, but sometimes, you don't even try, and we don't really know what exactly will have happened here. Certainly, it would have been better for Lenovo to say, I don't know, make that change that you mentioned, Ollie, rather than have Bagnaia spend all of Thursday going, all the sponsor stickers are ruining everything, aren't they? Which is the last thing you want the brand representative to be saying, and he said it multiple times, so clearly wasn't dissuaded from saying it by any corporate obligations. For me, a problem is, and okay, most people just tune in for the Grand Prix, so maybe that's fair enough. But so some of the liveries kicked in on Sunday warm-up. Some of them only did it in Sunday race. For the people who follow the entire weekend, that's not enough time to get used to them. That's not enough time to to assess them in your head. Yeah. And sometimes definitely. For a team like Trackhouse, whatever you make of the actual livery, I thought it was a bit busy, but the idea is fun. I didn't see it on TV. Nobody saw it on TV. They went out on lap 1 in the race together. You never saw either of their bikes. Cool. Well done. Well worth the effort then. And it's because, they didn't run it in warm-up. That was, whatever. There's probably a reason for that. But if you run the livery the whole weekend, at least you get the livery for the whole weekend. Instead of, you do the sprint race with the usual bikes. And then on Sunday, it's a new grid of bikes randomly colored differently. For MotoGP, it's an especially acute problem because you've mentioned the really nice Honda livery, Ollie. I mean, that was probably on TV for 5 seconds during the 20 laps?
Well, I'm glad I actually just managed to make it out onto track to see them all come out, to actually see them, because that was the last time I saw them, and then they all roll back in. Yeah,
I think I glimpsed Luca Marini at some point, maybe, vaguely remember that, but obviously the MotoGP TV direction, and I can't blame them so much for that in this race, but whatever. We'll focus on the familiar Ducatis, and you'll maybe catch a glimpse of that Aprilia in Aleix Espargaro's hands, but you have one 40-minute window to show all of them off. How does that work? I think that was a big misstep for me.
Well, the other thing for me with that is the Thursday reveal was a big deal. Don't then lose momentum by not seeing those bikes again till Sunday, and don't shortchange the people who maybe can't afford to come for the whole weekend or can only be there for the cheaper days by not letting them see those bikes in action as well. I didn't really get that. Apart from, I know the tradition for MotoGP is more that the special livery turns up for the race day, and maybe that tradition hasn't really modified for the sprint era yet. But no, that if they ever do it again, obviously this is a specific 75th anniversary thing, although I'd love for it to be a regular feature like it is in NASCAR. I really think they should tighten it unveil on Thursday and then let the bikes just be that colour?
Actually, one thing, obviously the practicalities of this are one thing, but actually if they really wanted to take advantage of this brilliant opportunity and get all the pictures out there, get MotoGP out into the world in this way, if there was a way they could have done like an exhibition showcase that was on the fan side of things and just have a bunch of dummy bikes with that bodywork, with those liveries all set up, leave them over on the other side so people could go get their selfies, people could go take a look at the bikes, have them locked away in a box. So you don't even need to have them in open air, but have them kind of locked away, and then people get that access. And for me, that would be a wonderful thing to do.
Given what we're about to talk about regarding the rest of the weekend at Silverstone, I completely agree, Ollie, except instead of doing it in the fan site, it should have been done in central London.
Oh, yes.
Because then maybe people in the UK would have known that there was a MotoGP race happening this weekend.
Well, absolutely.
We will absolutely get onto that topic. So another part of Ollie's weekend was him and Simon ended up on the main stage doing a fan meetup on behalf of the race on Sunday morning. We recorded that, and there'll be some of that broadcast in a bonus episode later this week. So we'll let you know, particularly in the Members Club, what we do with that. I think we'll probably be splicing some of it into the main feed and putting some of it out as a members exclusive. But thank you so much to everyone who turned up for that. Thank you so much to everyone who gave Simon and Ollie such a warm welcome. That was really appreciated. And for everyone who threw questions in as well, we'll definitely give you a chance to hear the answers to those across the Race MotoGP podcast in the next week or so. But we also had a question from the Race Members Club, Matthew Carrier, saying, what needs to be done to get the grandstands full again at Silverstone? Other tracks seem to have recovered from the Valentino Rossi hangover, but Silverstone looks like it's still in need of water and paracetamol on that front. So again, from just looking from the TV and from the pictures that we saw, a lot of empty grandstands. How did it feel at the event in terms of crowd numbers this year? What is it? Did anything improve at all? Because this has been a theme for a little while now. Silverstone struggling for MotoGP crowds.
Well, I think it was a real shame to see those numbers come in and to see it being down on last year. Because what happened this weekend was, this was a great weekend of motorcycle racing. There's great headlines in there as well. Jake Dixon, British rider, winning in the Moto2. This is a thing that should be really celebrated, but it's just such a shame to see those empty grandstands. And it comes across when you're there. You sort of notice that there's not as many people as you'd imagine. And even getting out of the circuit, I sort of was able to ride out, and it was okay. All of these things that you'd assume there would be a bigger fanfare and a bigger buzz. So it's a shame because it's there waiting, but it just needs the promotion. It needs the eyeballs kind of pointing in the right direction to build up some of that hype and some of that excitement as well. It's going to be interesting to see what the impact of shifting the date is, and how that can change things next year. And maybe shifting to May could be positive, perhaps. If people are away over the summer holidays, maybe that's one thing which kind of gets affected. But yeah, I mean, it just not hearing about it really in the build-up is just a bit of a shame. It feels like something for a very, the people that know already know about it, but you're not having people who are new fans who might be experimenting with, exploring different kind of motorsports, say they are interested in Formula E, IndyCar, whatever, different categories of things, and might go, oh, do you know what? I've never seen a motorcycle race before. This is the biggest, best motorcycle race out there. So why not come along? So you're kind of missing those incidental people who are broadly motorsport fans, but maybe aren't interested in motorcycle racing.
So I tweeted on Sunday afternoon the crowd figures, which were like 42,000, and the thing that kind of stuck with me was someone replied to me and said, yeah, and 41,999 of those people were here last year too. And that's kind of it. We're selling this event to the same audience over and over again, except that audience is diminishing a little bit year after year. And the painful thing is that the people who were there had a great weekend. There was an amazing lineup of events. Title sponsor Monster Energy seemed to have, I didn't make it to their fan zone because it was a long way away, but they seemed to have done like an absolutely phenomenal job putting on events all weekend. They had freestyle motocrossers, they had a load of guest appearances. Saturday night, the main stage had the Cooks playing on it. Sunday night had the Darkness playing on it, and that was free as part of your ticket. Like, it was a good weekend of activity, but whenever you're not telling people who are maybe the casual fan, the people who watched MotoGP when it was on BBC but who won't watch it now that it's behind a paywall on TNT Sports, you're only going to have a diminishing crowd figure year after year.
what can be done about that, Simon? Like you mentioned, let's get these bikes in central London. Is this literally that it needs to speak to a completely fresh audience? To
marketing?
Yeah.
You need to sell it. You need to, but you can't. You need to go out and sell it. You need to go out to people who don't know what it is or who are aware of it but who don't watch it and sell it to them. I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but I used to, before I came into MotoGP, I worked in British Superbikes, and the British Superbike Championship are really good at this. The first time that they went to race in Scotland, Knockhill, the first pre-event they did for it was closing off George's Square in the centre of Glasgow and bringing a load of British Superbike racers into pedestrian zone to do skids and wheelies and burnouts. And all on a Saturday afternoon, and all these people wandering by were like, what is this? And half of them bought tickets to go to Knockhill that weekend. It's not difficult. We've got this thing with motorbikes where we've got this product that is really visually spectacular, and it's loud and it's brash and it's bold and it looks fun. And it shouldn't be that hard to bring that to people so that they see what we have and engage them with it. Let's do a MotoGP drag race in Covent Garden. That's the sort of like stupid, dumb thing that would just be amazing. But there's no buy-in from it. There's no buy-in from it from the teams. Whenever someone can't be arsed to properly paint a fairing for the weekend to give the fans a better experience, then what hope is there of Ducati sending Pecco Bagnaia to London on his weekend off to do a pre-event in the middle of the city? But, if you're a Formula One driver, that's the sort of thing that's expected of you. And we're not very good at that. I remember on this podcast, whenever we had Davide Brivio on, one of the things that he pointed out was that he'd spoken to Fernando Alonso when he came to Austria last year, and Alonso couldn't believe how much time off the MotoGP riders had during a race weekend, because Alonso was just bounced from pure event to pure event during his weekend. We don't have that attitude, that culture, and we need to have it. We need to find a way to use these people, these awesome athletes that we have, to convince people that they're awesome athletes, basically.
I should say, if 8 Ducati bikes show up to hoon around on a passenger crossing next to my home, I'm calling the police. I think that's important to note.
Megan, you would definitely.
I should point out that the BSB event was an organised thing.
Yeah, it wasn't just like went rogue. Well, yeah, Megan's our Glasgow resident on the podcast, so I'm assuming she would be pro them all turning up to George Square again. But also, Megan, you straddle F1 and MotoGP in your career so far, and I know that F1 ticket prices can absolutely infuriate you like few other things, but F1 sells out at Silverstone. So what's your take on where MotoGP stands for fans of what it's doing at Silverstone?
Yes, F1 ticket prices are one of my particular bugbears. I have many thoughts that I will not go into right now. However, I have done some empirical fan research from this weekend. Big shout out and many thanks to Aaron and Alf, who have given me some feedback. So, Aaron and Alf went to Silverstone this weekend for their first MotoGP round. They'd started watching it kind of this year, bit of last year, and they've really enjoyed the product. Aaron already has TNT or a subscription that allows him to watch it, so that's why he started watching MotoGP. They're both F1 fans, and so they paid £150 each for tickets at Club Corner in Club C for Sunday for MotoGP. Those tickets for Formula One would have been £459 each. Okay. In F1 on a Sunday, you get 3 races. In MotoGP, they got 5. So you can start to see the difference here. You're getting a lot more for your money and you are paying a third of the price. And, given that they were both new fans to Silverstone for MotoGP, they had a really good time and their feedback has been really positive. They thought that you get a really good product for the money. And it's something we're always saying is the price of the ticket is obviously not really necessarily the issue here. It's the exposure. And they were saying they were kind of surprised there weren't that many people there. And it was a really, really good day, especially for the value. They also made the point that, everyone was very welcoming. It was, they understand that it doesn't get enough exposure though. And that's the problem. It's exactly what Simon was saying. If people aren't seeing it elsewhere, they're not going to pay £100 to go to Silverstone on a Sunday, £150 to go to Silverstone on a Sunday. This is the problem, is it's getting people to watch MotoGP to then see how good it is and then go to the race, put them in Leicester Square, Trafalgar Square, whatever. just get eyeballs on it. I think the pay-to-view thing is like a big issue here. Obviously, F1 is on Sky Sports F1, and that it costs however many millions of pounds a month. I cancelled mine, so that's how much that was. But if people have got Sky Sports, they're probably not going to pay for TNT as well. And that's the other issue. Is like, my dad is a great example. He started watching MotoGP like last year, really enjoyed it. He cancelled his TNT because he was paying for Sky and TNT, and you don't get many Premiership football games on TNT. So he cancelled that in favour of keeping Sky, which means he now, to watch MotoGP, has to wait till Monday evening to watch the highlights on ITV4, I think it is. So I'll get a text from my dad at like 9 p.m. on a Monday going, "Oh my gosh, what a good race." And I'm like, that was light years ago, Dad. But it's the only way he can watch it because he doesn't want to pay an extra, I think it's an extra like £40 a month for TNT. So that's something else that needs addressing, is like, if there's going to only be highlights, maybe the highlights need to be on a Sunday. Like, it's all of these exposure related reasons that, you know, the price is not the problem. The product you are getting for the price is really good. You know, 2 new fans have just told me that. The other problem for next year, I don't know if we were going to come onto this later, but I'll mention this now, is the scheduling. My 2 friends who were first time attendees this year will not be going next year because of the date change clashing with Monaco F1 and the Indy 500. So they've immediately lost 2 people who would have gone back but now won't. So
yeah, my first thought with the date change was, that weekend is always an absolute nightmare for staffing and giving space to promote everything that's going on that weekend already, because there's almost always a MotoGP clash with car race, 2 of car racing's absolute biggest and widest reach. Honestly, if I was MotoGP, I would just dodge that weekend and let the cars have it, because you're not going to get your more casual audience, you're just not going to get to them that weekend, sadly. Ollie, thank you so much for your time jumping on this episode too. Simon, thank you so much for looking after Ollie. Listeners, if you want to hear Ollie's full behind-the-scenes adventures at Silverstone, including the riding, including chat with Randy Momola, including everything else he got up to, that will be in the Race Members Club feed later this week, and we'll have a little bit of that in next week's main feed episode as well. And same with the on-stage Q&A that Simon and Ollie did from Silverstone on Sunday. Back into the bucket of the Race Members Club questions. We're going to get through most of them. We will save a few for other episodes in the future. As one of you asked about Simon Crafar versus Freddie Spencer. We need 5 hours for that, so let's leave that for a different day, but we will definitely get to it before the next race. But one thing that struck me from this weekend was it was all GP24s at the front. It felt like the most GP24 dominated part of the season so far almost, and yet there were only 3 of them. The other one was missing. The other one was bouncing off Marco Bezzecchi on the first lap of the sprint, and then just not competitive on Sunday, even accounting for the long lap penalty. We have 3 Franco Morbidelli questions. John Ip says, it's not even a question, it's a blunt statement, John. I really do not see a way Morbidelli wins a race this season. Gordon says, it seems like Morbidelli isn't very fast and keeps crashing into people. Why do you think this is? And Eleanor says, does Morbidelli deserve the VR46 seat, which is where he is now near certain to be next season? And if not, who else would you like to see take it? Now let's stick with his current form at the moment. Bad weekend for Morbidelli following his Saxon Ring breakthrough. Let's just take Gordon's question. Morbidelli isn't very fast and keeps crashing. Why?
I mean, in terms of keeps crashing, he did have sort of at least something resembling an explanation for what happened in the sprint. Which, you know, if you do watch the replay, he's basically blamed the crash on the mismatch of speed coming into the corner between himself and Maverick Vinales. And if you rewatch it, yeah, it does look like there's a bit of that going on. I think not enough to really fully justify it. You know, Morbidelli said it was a racing incident. I don't see it that way. I don't see an incident at turn 1 like that as a racing incident, even if Vinales had slowed to a crawl, which he hadn't quite done. But I think Vinales was also trying to disengage the ride height device, so that's another great thing about it. Congratulations. But you know, I'm more with the stewards on that one, that it was ultimately just the kind of mistake that you shouldn't make. And I think there's been a record in recent years, which is, you know, Franco Morbidelli being a bit of a troublemaker on track when it comes to racing other riders, having laps as a judgment, having errors, and some that he's gone unpunished for, and some that in this case he's gone punished for. I don't know if his reputation for that played into it being a double long lap rather than a single long lap. I think it is important to note that, Matt, you said he wasn't competitive on Sunday. I think a double long lap just wrecks your race. I don't think he was bad. I think ultimately he got as much
result
as he was going
poor,
to get.
but
Yeah, but like he had to clear a bunch of bikes, and I think towards the end of the race, just looking at the lap times, when he wasn't clean air, he looked fine. It wasn't a great weekend, especially considering that, the other GP24s obviously just completely wrecked shop up front. And Morbidelli still, you don't really know how close he is to what he can actually do on this bike, because if this is it, then this is not good enough, obviously. I think that much is clear. If this is it, this is not enough. This is not good. But if there's more to catch up, then maybe we'll see it at some of the other more favorable tracks. Tracks like Misano.
I think you make a really good point there, Val, which is that the kind of Frankie has had a few incidents like this, and he's had a few quite public spats with people. Think about all the Aleix stuff, all the Morbidelli Espargaro beef we had at the end of last year, and then kind of there was a little flare up again at Le Mans, I think it was. So he has had a bit of a problem with this. I think, as you said though, there could still be more to come from him. If we have this conversation again in kind of a few months and nothing's changed, I would say maybe, it's not good enough and he doesn't deserve that seat. But for now, I think given where we are in this season, we've kind of got a little bit longer for him to get to grips with things. Given that he missed the preseason, maybe he's still catching up. Maybe we can give him the benefit of the doubt for now. But, come November, he's going to need to have shown a marked improvement.
I don't know if this counts as giving him the benefit of the doubt, but he's not crashing into people because he's slow. He's crashing into people because he's Franco Morbidelli. He has a reputation.
Great defense.
He has built himself. I'm not trying to defend him. But the exact opposite. He's built himself a reputation as being this absolute gentleman and super polite, super friendly guy off the bike, and then he gets on it and he just turns into a monster that tries to ride through people, or who more likely switches off his brain and does really, really careless, stupid, dangerous things on track. I said this straight after that incident, I think in our group chat, Val, that if we still had the penalty point system, he would be the closest person to a race ban right now, because there is a consistent history of Franco Morbidelli doing really dumb stuff. More than anyone since Andrea Iannone, in terms of how consistently he's involved in these really reckless incidents. So I don't think that's anything at all to do with his space. He has been doing that on a Yamaha when he was really, really slow. He's now doing it in a Ducati whenever he's quite fast on occasion. Yeah, it's unrelated to that.
There's a few riders on the MotoGP right now who have the reputation for, I don't want to say being aggressive, verging on reckless, and Morbidelli is certainly one of them, but he's also had a lot of spats with some of the other guys with that same reputation. The Marquez brothers is an obvious one. Johan Zarco. Somebody else who was in my head just now and I immediately forgot, so good work there.
Marco Bezzecchi. Saturday, but also there's two separate incidents with Aleix.
But Aleix is one who he does make a mistake or two, but he generally he speaks about wanting to ride without contact, whereas I think Morbidelli, Zarco, and the Marquez brothers are four guys who accept contact as a part of being, who really try to incorporate it into their tactics in a way, and we've seen Mark do that in the Ducati Race of Champions in the lead up to this event, with the last corner incident with Nicola Bulliga, for which he kind of apologized, but not really, but kind of. But I think Morbidelli is the one who has been most conspicuous in letting those turn into errors that are being broadcast while not necessarily having the speed to offset it. Mark will do something and you'll be like, I don't really like the way he's raced that person or that person, but there's more for him to skate by on because he's really fast. And, you take one thing with the other, and it's an effective weapon. For Morbidelli, I think for a while it hasn't been an effective weapon necessarily. Also because, a lot of it's not just collisions with other riders, as I think Simon and I often discuss, it's dawdling on the line and getting into the way of people in qualifying, which, again, basically everybody does at this point because qualifying has become totally unwatchable. But Morbidelli was one of the canary in the coal mine a little bit in a way. I don't want to sit here and say like he's a dirty rider or whatever, but yeah, he's been error prone, and it's also maybe part of it is, remember, he did suffer basically a traumatic brain injury to start the season, but more it's that he's still, the bike probably still doesn't quite feel his totally, I imagine.
It's more clumsy than dirty, but it's
yes,
like you say, It's been a trend across multiple bikes, multiple teams now. We did get a question from Eleanor about whether he deserves the seat he's going to get next season. Let's bring that into this next question. Another one from Eleanor actually says, are you surprised Jack Miller has no offers from anywhere? And Matt B, which is not me, says, why do you think Miller has no offers? And why do you think Trackhouse would choose Ayagura over Joe Roberts, which is another developing rider market story? So we're looking, after the recent rider market developments, that Franco Morbidelli definitely safe, definitely ending up VR46. Ayagura potentially beating everybody else who is a contender to the second Trackhouse ride alongside Raul Fernandez, and Jack Miller not being on the grid at all. Val, your hand shot up on this one. Why do you think it's heading this way for Miller in particular?
So I remember a discussion that was had on the episode where I was in the air in a plane, allegedly, except I wasn't actually. Had to take a bus home. Yeah. But the discussion was, Miller sort of suggested, sort of half hinted that he sees part of the reason, of him being outspoken is part of the reason for why, phones haven't been ringing. He did get nudged a bit towards that answer. So, whenever you hear riders say something that's a little bit outrageous, it sounds a little bit outrageous. You also have to remember that sometimes a question was positioned in a particular way because the reporter agrees with them or tries to get an elaboration on a theory. So it's not, and then sometimes that soundbite is taken without the question, and it just sounds like a person being super, super arrogant, which I don't think it's the case. I do agree that that's probably not it, because Miller's outspokenness is not, as the guys have said, it's not in the way that you would think. He is, because he has been a MotoGP survivor living from contract to contract, he actually has been basically an exemplary company man when talking about the various places that have employed him up until the point where he leaves them, in which case he sort of opens up a little bit more. I don't think it's that. I just think MotoGP team bosses are a lot like us in that sometimes they're just tired of a guy. And they've looked at Jack Miller's career progression. They were like, we know what you can do. We understand your ceiling now. And we don't believe it's quite enough for us. You're a good qualifier. You're, I think, a pretty good development rider, but we think that you're either only fast in the first half of the race or just not fast enough overall. And for us, maybe he doesn't peak at the right moments for them. It does surprise me a little bit because I think he's still decent, but this is MotoGP. We have 22 places on the grid or whatever. I mean, there's going to be some serious competition for that, obviously, and somebody who's, a tenured veteran, they are going to fall out of the grid maybe sometimes earlier than it feels like is totally deserved. I'm not too surprised. I mean, the Trackhouse fit seemed pretty good to me. The Ayagura thing does surprise me a little bit, but I get it. Inside, I understand the appeal, the allure. It's more romantic. It feels like it's getting you somewhere, and that also is important.
Megan, I'm going to let you come in first because your hand came up during the Miller section, and I feel like we don't yet know your stance on Miller, whereas ours are quite well established.
People are bored of watching him crash.
And now
we know where Megan lies.
In my house, we watch MotoGP, and you see that the yellow flags have come out before you see who's crashed, and you go, "Oh, is it Jack Miller or a Honda rider?" Thriller Miller, who finished 7th in the sprint and 12th in the main race, the opportunities for him to prove that he's worth keeping on the grid, he's had a lot of them, and I just think that maybe that time has run out. And I think letting new riders have a go from Moto2, yes, it's a risky strategy, as we saw with Remy Gardner. Sometimes it doesn't last very long. But maybe just giving someone else that opportunity at this point is a good idea. I do I was kind of surprised to hear that he didn't have any opportunities in World Superbikes, because I did think that might be quite a good fit for him. But I don't know the ins and outs of how they do business over there, so I don't know. But I just think that maybe his time has just naturally come to an end. Like Val said, maybe it is a bit early, but like I do think it's just kind of reached its natural conclusion now. The opportunities have run out, and that's just kind of how it is. Like, I just don't think that he has performed, that. And I think that like you said, obviously the outspoken thing, like as a soundbite, yes, you have to listen to the whole thing and see what's been said before that. But like, I do think that's a bit of like I'm just so outspoken, that's why people don't like me. I've heard that before from Dan Ticktum. Like, that's the same thing of being like, oh, well, I say my mind and people don't like that. It's like, is that the case? I don't know. But, I'm not saying the two people are similar, by the way. I'm just saying I've heard that before elsewhere. I've made that very clear. I'm not saying Jack Miller is like Dan Ticktum, and I'm not saying Dan Ticktum is like Jack Miller. I'm just saying I've heard them both say very similar things.
Our crossover bikes and cars audience will have all nodded along to that. If for the bikes only audience, give Dan Ticktum a little Google and ask us in the members club if you've got any further questions. We'll be happy to fill you in. Very fast driver, I would say, though.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Simon, over to you on Miller and Agura and everything else in that ecosystem.
And Dan Ticktum, Simon, please let us know what do you think.
No,
there?
not on this podcast. That's a different time.
The best thing I can say about Jack Miller is that I think Megan's been a little bit harsh in her criticism of his crash record, because there was a point where that was very much the case, but now the reality is much more that Jack just destroys his tires and fades into obscurity mid-race, and then instead of falling off finishes 12th, which is not very thrilling, regardless of nicknames. He hasn't been thrilling in quite a while, to be perfectly honest. And I get that, look, not everyone is here to win races every weekend. Not every rider in this grid is a championship contender. I have no problem. I've said this over and over again. Personalities are good. It is good to have a good mixed group of personalities in this grid. It's good to have guys who can come out of nowhere and win races when you don't expect it. It's great to have guys who have specialized skill sets, like, mastering damp tracks and making everyone else look average whenever the conditions are just right. But you can only do that for so long, and it comes to a point where 10 years is a long time to kind of be a one-trick pony. And
yeah,
I have no problem with him moving aside to make room for someone new and fast to come in and shake things up a bit, because a bit of constant move through is good. And
on that topic of someone new coming through to shake things up, it looks like Agura has become a strong favourite for this much sought after Trackhouse ride. Weird weekend for that news to be followed by Agura going from pole to, where was he, 14th in the Moto2 race and dealing his title hopes a bit of a blow. But as a general concept, Agura into MotoGP next year, good idea, bad idea? Very
good idea, because he's a very good rider.
Yeah, it's a good idea. He's very, very good. And he the original questioner asked, why not Joe Roberts? Look, Trackhouse have been adamant about this from the start. They're not appointing an American just because he's an American, and until the point comes where there's an American who they believe deserves the ride, then they're not going to just stick someone in for the sake of their passport. And would you, if they were both from the Antarctica, would you sign Joe Roberts or would you sign Agura right now?
Agura any day of any week.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think they're completely right to pursue that line, because why wouldn't you?
Joe's having a really good season. He's clearly, he's found a certain groove, even though he did crash out of the race. He was running up front. He still remains the highest placed Calyx rider in the standings. Arguably, he should have made more of this weekend, because this looked like the one weekend where the Calyxes definitively had something on the Boscoscuros, and just the Boscoscuro form guide looked like a total just mess through the weekend. But this Joe Roberts season is at best as good as like 4 or 5 Agura seasons from various parts of his Grand Prix racing career. The guy's legit, and he is also younger, I believe. I should have looked that up.
Yeah, Agura is only 23, which struck me because I was like, wow, it does feel like he's been around a while, because this is his 4th year of Moto2, but his career's good. I think people and when I say people, I mean partly me. I think Agura slightly compromised his reputation because, of course, the 2022 title bid in Moto2 went awry right at the end, and he had a dip season after that, and at the same time was turning down...
Because he hurt himself.
Yes, true. Was then turning down Honda MotoGP rides for quite sensible reasons, but it felt like that momentum he had for 2020 at the end of 2022, when he's Honda's next chosen guy and he's nearly won a title, was very strong. And it's like, well, if he's lost that momentum, is he ever getting it back, whether he's lost it for performance, injury, or state of Honda reasons? And actually, he has got it back, and he's probably heading to MotoGP, not with Honda. So, yeah, fair play to that. Finally, this is not a Members Club question. This is a question from Matt, me. We've had some legendary rants about Yamaha in the podcast this season, where Neil Simon says something quite positive about Yamaha progress, and then Val eviscerates us for our naivety in trusting them. However, when I asked for what you guys all wanted to talk about in this week's episode, Val said Yamaha making big strides. So when you look at the results, it does not look like a weekend where Yamaha made big strides. That wasn't a bad, by current Yamaha standards, end result. But Val, talk about Yamaha for a short period, and I'll let these two then agree or disagree with you.
Oh, this is unfortunate because I was being sarcastic. I didn't think you'd use that.
Damn it!
That was not something I actually meant. Sorry. No, they're still where they are, and I'm still not 100%. I think even you could hear it in Fabio Quartararo, some of the answers, that he's not 100% convinced that the Yamaha is ahead of the Honda, or at least was this weekend, which is also slightly a way of talking himself up. There are good things about it, I think, but there was an expectation of a step this weekend that didn't come. And I think... genuinely, I think until we see, I'll stay consistent on this, until we'll see a step that takes the Yamaha into like 7th, 8th regularly, it's not worth talking about much, the foundations that they're putting in place, in a way, because all of those foundations, at a certain point, you're just going to run out of time to turn them into anything in this regulation cycle. Both, I think both KTM and Aprilia this weekend have had pretty rotten, pretty awful weekends if you look at it holistically. I mean, the Ducati is just destroying everybody in fuller length races with the way it protects the tires, even when it's not Enea Bastianini riding. And despite this, none of the Japanese manufacturers were there to meaningfully capitalize on that. And Quartararo did, full credit to him, pick off both Miller and Viñales, but then got beaten by the double long lap Franco Morbidelli. It's just, they're in a chasm, and I don't see lap time progress yet. And that's the kind of guy I am. Maybe that's harsh, but I won't believe it until I see it. And once I see it, I want to be 100% clear here. This is not like a hating thing, whatever. Once I see it, I'll be thrilled. 5 manufacturers fighting at the top. Great. Wonderful, but they're nowhere near, both of them. And I think Yamaha is much closer to Honda in its progression than it is to any of the other brands in this championship.
Megan, you mentioned Fabio Quartararo actually sounded like he might be a little bit in Camp Val with his assessment after. It sounded like he was given some quite positive questions, but played it down a bit.
Yeah, I feel really sorry for Fabio. Like, I've always really liked Fabio, and it's just like you hear him, you listen to him now compared to like at the end of 2021, and it's just like, oh man, this is so depressing. He said that someone asked him a question and said like, oh, is it better? And he was like, it looks better than it feels. Like, we had less grip than Honda.
Ouch.
Bad, generally just bad. Yeah. And it's like, he finished 12th, and I saw that result, and I was like, oh, good for Fabio. But like you said, he was passed by someone who had 2 long lap penalties. Like, that's like being like, oh, I only got dog shit on one of my shoes. Like, it's like, oh God, like, it's, do you know what I mean? Like, he's trying his best, and you can see he's trying his best, and he's trying not to be really like demotivated, because I remember he got criticised for being quite critical. I think it was like last year, someone else made a dig like, oh, he's always slagging them off, whatever. But like, they are trying. You can see that they're trying, and obviously it was Val who made that comment.
Well, I don't think so. No, I don't think that's accurate.
I think he's trying, and they're trying. I just don't think they're quite pulling it together. Now, obviously, the fact that Cal Crutchlow couldn't do his wild card, things like that don't help. But like, unfortunately, I think Fabio's assessment that like things looked better than they felt, and that the weekend wasn't actually very good after all is probably a fair assessment, unfortunately.
The only thing I'll say is that it's you said that whenever you listen to him now versus whenever you listen to him at the end of 21. Yes, but if you listen to him now versus at the end of 23, he is a ray of sunshine because things are getting better. And that's kind of where my belief that there's something coming. And I actually think that the reason sometimes at the minute, like this weekend, that he's quite, rah about how the weekend has went is because they come into these weekends for the first time expecting better.
Yeah.
Rather than expecting it to be the same piece of crap that it has been for quite some time, because it is starting to make a bit of progress.
You do make a good point there, actually, because I remember at the Valencia test in November, he was just like, oh my God. And he definitely seems cheerier than he did now. Although, funnily enough, Joan Mir seemed quite positive at that test in Valencia in November, and he seems less...
Yeah, that didn't last.
Enthused now. He made a comment over the weekend about, I think it was Joan. Someone was like, got a new engine. Is that nice? And he was like, no, not nice. Good, but not nice.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, man.
I think I have like a armchair psychology way to explain away those changes in tact. For Quartararo, he was at his most discontent when there was a contract negotiation on the table. So it was arguably in his best interests to make it obvious how unhappy he is with the bike. But now that he's married to it anyway, there's no need to bring everybody down. I think that's at least part of it. But he does genuinely believe in Max Bartolini and the rest of the Ducati brigade that came over. And for Joan Mir, I think he was in a position where he's like, I'm not sure that I'll learn a new contract here, but I kind of want to. And then, and now he's earned a new contract here, but the bike is bad. It's Joan Mir. He's been on an emotional roller coaster every weekend, it feels like, with the Honda. At least compared to that, Fabio has been a consistent ray of sunshine all year. Yeah, I agree.
Just to round everything up in terms of recent themes in this episode, I just was sat here in a bit of disbelief going, oh wow, we're in this bizarre world where next year Franco Morbidelli is at VR46, admittedly on a year-old bike. Ayagura, admittedly an excellent Moto2 prospect, is getting what should be a pretty decent Trackhouse Yamaha. And Fabio Quartararo and Joan Mir have opted to stay on these bikes doing this. Eleanor asked who should be on that VR46 bike, if not Morbidelli. On merit, either of these two guys. Fabio Quartararo being stuck on a bike that can only finish 12th on a good day. Wow. But we've been here before. Go on, Megan.
How much is Fabio Quartararo being paid to ride said bike?
Yeah,
but
if I was being paid that much, I would just ride the bike. I would be happy. Love the bike. Great work.
No, that is a fair point.
The only reason there is a seat for Franco Morbidelli at VR46 is because one of the previous occupants left it to go to Repsol Honda.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Whoa.
It's not just a money gap. It is a prestige gap. It is
It's a prestige thing. Yeah.
But at the same time, none of that Fabio contract money is making into my pocket. Which, by the way, Yamaha, if you want me to be a lot nicer about the M1 on this podcast, that's a joke. I kid. I am incorruptible. I would like to make that clear.
I'm not.
But, yeah,
I think Val's rants about them are the least of Yamaha's problems at present.
That is 100% true. They should not care. If they do, they should never ever care. But for us as viewers, the frustration is clear, and I think that is maybe part of why me, a usually, I'd say, fairly positive guy, right, guys?
Well, yeah,
right?
This is it. This is why your Yamaha rants attract attention from listeners and us. It's because normally it's me and Simon just going, rah, slating something for kicks, and then you're going, no, I'm the voice of sensible human reason. And then we did this, we'd like the Yamaha views, and it's, but yeah.
Imagine if we were in a situation right now where Fabio hadn't won 21, where, both 21 and 22 slipped away, and he was in this position. How desperately sad that would be for a rider of this caliber. It is a little fortunate, I think, for MotoGP narrative-wise, just because this is a guy who is, a world champion, deservedly so, and still, by all accounts, one of the best riders on the grid. And he's still got, because he's so young, he's still got so much of his prime, but it's, it's wasting away. The time marches on, inexorably, inevitably. Marc Marquez realized that after his injury. Fabio Quartararo might realize that at the expiry of this contract. Maybe not. Maybe the Yamaha will get it right, and that'll be a lovely story. But if it doesn't, then we will have lost two more years of a rider who it also would be good for MotoGP if he was up front. It's just, yeah.
To be fair, if you want to be really depressed on a Monday lunchtime, Google how old Fabio is, because I've just done that and I'm like, oh, he's not running out of time that quickly. He's 25 and he's, you know, he won his world championship, 3 years ago now? So he's still got time.
But is that not already geriatric by modern MotoGP standards?
25 isn't.
25
is, yeah. Nah. 25 isn't, but no matter what people like Pedro Acosta are doing right now, 25 is still okay for getting a second half of your career going.
I randomly had a conversation about how old we're getting with Luca Marini over the weekend, who went to Ibiza in the summer break and decided that it was too busy and loud.
Oh, my man.
How old is Luca Marini?
Not old enough to feel that way, considerably younger than me.
Oh my God, he's only 26.
Yeah.
Good heavens.
Oh my God.
It's a real shock because you look at the age of F1 drivers and I'm like, some of them I'm like similar age. Then you've got Fernando Alonso, but like you look at the MotoGP grid and it's like, oh, even the older ones are not much older than me.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all younger than me. I hate it.
I'm closer in age to Aleix Espargaro than I am to Pedro Acosta. Like,
Marc Marquez's 93 is kind of an unpleasant reminder every time because that is also my birth year. And I'm like, well, you've just been around forever. I guess in a way, so have I.
For a second, I thought Val, who does not have the straightest relationship with time and timekeeping, was going to argue that Marc Marquez was 93 years old there and that. But
you know what? Being born in 93 does sometimes feel that way. As ridiculous.
It could be worse. It could be Aleix, who pointed out last year that Firmin Aldeguer is closer in age to Aleix's son than he is to Aleix.
And on that note, while we are talking about the inexorable passage of time, let's wrap this episode up and let listeners get on with their days. Thank you, Megan, for joining us for your latest wildcard appearance. You'll be back for more. Thank you, Val. Thank you, Simon, as ever as well. Thank you, listeners, for the questions and your patience and engagement. We'll be back in both the Members Club with some bonuses this week and then back in your ears looking ahead to Austria in a week's time.
The Athletic.